Look, I know Drake is persona non grata right now, but just like Drake quote, started from the working class, now we here, you know? Hey all, I'm Kara Perez, founder of Bravely Go and first-time homeowner. Yes, this little corner, this little backdrop that you see in my videos, this is my house. I own this house. And I bought it all by myself with money that I earned from my own business. Insert Taylor Swift soundbite here.
We're like, sorry, was I loud? In my own house that I bought with the songs that I wrote about my own life.
So today I want to talk about the process of buying the house, the numbers of buying the house, doing this as an unmarried, self-employed woman, and what it means for my partner. And also, as I said, I bought this house, so I bought it by myself. I did not buy it with my partner T-Bone, and that means he is my tenant. And if you're interested in how we came to that decision, the money around that decision, you know, what he pays in rent and how he's protected, how I'm protected, I cover all of that in a patrons only post. So if you become a patron at the link in the description, you will get access to that post and you'll get all the juicy details. So let's start with the obvious question. Why did I want to do this? So I started saving for a house about 10 years ago, 2014, shout out. December 2014 is when I got really serious about my financial life. That's when I decided, hey, I'm gonna pay off my student loans, I'm gonna blog about this, I'm going to really make an effort to get my financial life together. And that's when I started saving for a house. I mean, not very much. I literally put $10 in a savings account and just left it there until I paid off my debt. But that was sort of a promise to myself that one day I would buy a house. And I have to say that having a house has been a low-key obsession of mine for a really long time. And it's kind of interesting because I've never been house insecure. I have always had stable housing, but I've always been very concerned that I won't have stable housing. I don't really know where that fear comes from, but nonetheless, I live with it. So even as I was paying off my student loans, even as I've been investing in the stock market and growing my business, in the back of my mind, I've always known I want to buy a house by myself. And look, let's be real. I'm a 36-year-old unmarried woman. I've been with my partner almost 11 years. He's amazing and wonderful, but we're not married. And I don't know if we'll ever get married because it's something that both stresses me out, frankly, and it's also something that comes with a lot of protections, but also a lot of fines. When you are married, legally, you are a united figure when it comes to your assets. And unless you have a prenup or you live in a state that's not community property, it can be very, very difficult to unmerge yourself financially from the person you married. And so for me, buying a house by myself in my own name is a form of protection. I am the only one on the mortgage. I am the only one on the deed. T-Bone can't take this from me if we get married and then divorced. T-Bone can't sue me and say, this is my house because I have paid for everything. When it comes to this house, this is my house. And to me, this house is a form of protection because it's a place that I can own, I can live in by myself should we break up, I can live in old age. I will always have a place to go that kind of assuages my fear of being homeless. And it just makes sense for my life, for my finances, to have this in my own name. So what was the process like of buying a house as an unmarried, self-employed person? Honestly, I was really afraid of the process. I thought it was going to be a freaking nightmare because I don't have a W-2 job and I haven't had a W-2 job since 2019. But it was a lot easier than I thought it would be. And I say that it was definitely a little more complicated than your average real estate transaction, but that's for two reasons. One, I started looking for a house in Massachusetts when we still lived in North Carolina. So I was just on Redfin every day looking at houses in areas that we might want to move to and sending them to a realtor who was on the ground here in Massachusetts. So before I bought this house, I never actually toured it. I didn't get to see it in person until I had already made the offer and the offer had been accepted. There was a real leap of faith, and it's not something I can recommend, honestly. And given the opportunity to do it again, I would not take that opportunity. No, no, no. Always try and see the house in person. Really, that was a wild choice that I made, but it made sense at the time because I wasn't going to fly up from North Carolina and try and jam in as many house sightings as I could because we weren't sure we'd move to this area specifically because T-Bone was interviewing for jobs all over the state, like from far western Mass to the center of Boston. We were all over the place. So we didn't know that we'd end up here, and I couldn't fly up and be like, let's drive across the state of Massachusetts like once a month while he was in the interview process. So how did I end up in this specific house? I found it on Redfin. I emailed it to my realtor because it was in my price range, which we're going to talk about in a second. And my realtor looked at the, MLS, got the details and was like, yep, it's available. And then I talked to T-Bone. I said, look at this house. How do you feel? He was like, okay, I think we can make that work. And then unfortunately, it was gone. The day after I found this house and talked to T-Bone and said, yeah, we think we can make this work, I texted my realtor and I said, I want to make an offer. And she said, I'm so sorry, an offer has already been accepted. And it was very womp, womp, womp. Okay, that's fine. But then that offer ended up falling through. My realtor contacted me and said, they're still accepting offers. If you want to make one, we have a window. I said, yes, let's come in right at asking. We did. And about, I want to say 12 hours later, my offer was accepted. Yay. Why do I think my offer was accepted? I think I had a very strong buyer profile. I have excellent credit. My credit is over 800 and I have no debt. Or at least I have no debt that shows up on my credit report. I do have $6,000 in medical debt, but that is not on my credit report at all. So when my loan officer ran my numbers, they saw I had a really high credit score. They saw that I had no debt. So the mortgage would be my only debt. That makes me a very attractive candidate for a mortgage. I also had been saving for 10 years. So I had a good amount of money saved as a down payment for this house. I had saved $80,000 in cash in a high yield savings account over the last decade. And I was willing to put down up to $50,000 for the down payment and closing costs. I was not willing to use the full 80 as down payment and closing costs because I'm a financial educator and I knew the thing about houses break, okay? Like, you're gonna move in, something is immediately gonna break and you're gonna have to replace it. So I wanted to move in with an emergency fund already established. And that's why 50 of the 80K was my absolute max for down payment and closing costs. But having that 50K meant that was a pretty hefty down payment. I didn't have to use any of the first time buyer lending programs. I was able to kind of like stand on my own as a candidate. And I had some wiggle room with the down payment. So if it was a competitive process to get the house, I knew that I could go up, right? However, there were also things in the search that I think made me perhaps more difficult to deal with as a buyer than my realtor wanted. That's because, again, I'm a financial educator and I was not going to be pushed or manipulated or bullied into buying more house than I can afford. I was approved for a lot more money than this house actually cost. And when I got my approval letter, I was like, holy moly, that's bananas. And I'm going to share exact numbers in a second, but just to stress, I couldn't believe how much I was approved for. And what I was approved for would have made my monthly mortgage payments insane. Like mortgage payments I could not afford, quite frankly. So I was like, there's no way I'm buying that much house. Secondly, I wanted to buy a house with a big enough piece of land attached to it where I could build in the future an ADU, an additional dwelling unit. I live in Massachusetts. Across the state, it is legal to build an ADU in your backyard as long as you get the permitting and you pay for it yourself. I knew that was something I was very interested in for two main reasons. And like I mentioned before, I see this house as an investment in my future financial security outside of my partner or really outside of any other person's finances. Having an ADU in my backyard means that I can ideally one day have an additional piece of housing to add into the housing stock. I think we all know the US is in a housing crisis. There's not enough to be able to build a tiny house and provide it at a significant discount to someone in my community is very much so values aligned with me. It's also something that in case I have a friend or a family member in need of housing, I would be able to offer up. And it increases the overall value of my house, which would make this purchase in general a more valuable purchase if and when I go to sell it down the line. However, finding a property that fit that requirement definitely took a little bit longer than I think my realtor realized. And I also think she didn't really get the vision that I had for the ADU. I'm not totally sure she understood why I feel so passionately about it, but to her credit, she did visit a lot of houses for me while I was in North Carolina, so I appreciate that a lot. And I understand that, as a money nerd, as a financial educator, I'm looking at the house very differently than your average first-time home buyer. Now, I also want to say, as a money nerd who adheres deeply and strictly to her value-based budget, I also knew that the number that I was approved for, there was no way I was ever going to spend. So I was approved for over $600,000, which in the state of Massachusetts is actually not that much. According to Zillow, the average Massachusetts home value is $627,596, up 6.1% over the past year, and the average house goes pending in 11 days. According to Forbes, the median home price in Massachusetts is $601,000. The United States is in a housing crisis, and Massachusetts is a very expensive, very competitive housing market. So I was approved for really what is just the median house here. However, with interest rates being so high right now, and with property taxes being fairly high in Massachusetts, I knew that if I used my full approval amount, that if I bought a house for $600,000, that would have my mortgage be in the $4,000 to $5,000 range all in. So including property taxes, including home insurance, and including the mortgage itself. And I'm just not in a position to pay $5,000 a month for a mortgage. I'm just not. Even living with a partner, paying $2,500 a month is outside of my budget. It's important that I set that stage for you because now I want to talk about the actual house that I bought. I genuinely believe it may be the last of its kind in the United States. I bought a single family home that is a 2-bed, 1-bath, and it is a total of, drumroll please, wow, I'm so sorry about my drum roll. It is a total of 690 square feet. Yes, I live in a glorified tiny home. It does have a backyard, it does have a front yard, but it has no closets. There are no closets in my house. Which is unfortunate for me, but really, really good motivation to downsize for sure. The size of the house was my partner's biggest hangup, and that was the thing that we mostly discussed when I found the house. I brought it to him. I said, you know what, the price is right, the location is right. The size of the house is a challenge. How do you feel about this? And he was really concerned about that, not because we have so much stuff or we wanted to have a like 3,000 square foot home, but more so it's just 690 square feet is small. And we were a little concerned that like our couch wouldn't fit in the living room area. Like, it is a small space, but ultimately I decided that this was a good decision because the numbers were really good and we're only 2 people. A lot of people in the US have way too much house. Over the last 75 years, the US housing market has transformed dramatically. The average size of a new single-family home ballooned from 909 square feet in 1949 to 2,480 square feet in 2021. 2,500 square feet is huge in my opinion, and we're just 2 people. We don't need 2,500 square feet. That's a lot more square footage to heat up, to cool down, to clean. The bigger the house, the more furniture you have to buy. Buying too much house really gets you into a financial trap that is very difficult to escape from. So when I was looking at my decision to buy a house, I really didn't want huge square footage, and I didn't want a huge price tag. That said, I wasn't thinking 690 is exactly perfect. I was hoping for around 1,000, maybe 1,100 square feet, you know, but c'est la vie, we are where we are, and it worked out for us. So finally, let's dig into the numbers. How much did my house cost? How much did I pay for it? What did I put down? Let's get into it. The house cost $300,000 even. Now I know that many of you are probably thinking, damn girl, you paid $300,000 for 690 square feet, and let me tell you, yes, I did. Yes, I did. But truly, that is the 2024 Massachusetts housing market. It is an expensive ass state. It's an expensive ass market. And that was it, baby. I don't feel great about it. I do feel like I overpaid, but I also know that this was the cheapest house by far, and it is going to appreciate in my favor. How much did I put down? I put down 10%, so $30,000 went towards my down payment. My closing costs were $9,925. But because I was buying from out of state, I got hit with a bunch of other costs that are not normal parts of the house buying process. For example, I spent $134 on flights up to Massachusetts from North Carolina so that I could sign the actual papers. I was not able to have a remote closing, which honestly was super frustrating in 2024, but c'est la vie. I also had to get cashier's checks to mail the original deposit and then the remainder for closing costs and the actual down payment because the brokerages that I was going through could not accept online payments, which was really frustrating. And so that cost me extra money. I had to pay for the appraisal, and I also, as a self-employed person, had to pay for a letter from my CPA that stated that my business was in good standing and was profitable and that I would be able to make the mortgage payments henceforth. Like I mentioned before, I really thought that buying a house as a self-employed person was going to be a much bigger struggle than it was. I did have to provide all of my financial life. I had to provide business financial records, I had to provide personal financial records, all of that kind of stuff. But I also had to take a few extra steps. Basically, the bank wanted to know, hey, the cash flow that you've had over the last couple of years, is that going to be the cash flow you'll have in the next couple of years? And as a self-employed business of one, it can be difficult to prove that, but I was very upfront with all of my business bank accounts, and this is why I really recommend to any freelancers or any self-employed people to keep meticulous financial records, because this part was actually very easy for me because I had those records. I was like, boom, here's my taxes, boom, here's my profit and loss, boom, here's everything you could ever want to know about how I make money. And that made the whole process a lot easier. I will also say, though, I was hugely and deeply frustrated by the fact that I couldn't have a remote closing. Like, having to fly up just for a literal 5-minute process of signing all the papers was so frustrating and annoying. And when I asked my realtor and the real estate attorney if I could do a remote closing, they were both like, "What are you talking about? No, we don't do that." And I was like, babes, it's 2024. How did you make it through COVID not doing remote closings? How could you not shift online? Similarly, with the brokerage of the seller, they couldn't accept online payments. They couldn't accept like an ACH transfer or Zelle or Venmo or something. They were like, no, you have to send a check. And I was like, this is crazy, bro. So I had to mail 3 separate checks from North Carolina to Massachusetts in order to get this house. And each time I had to pay a cashier's check fee. And I was deeply frustrated by all of that. It felt very 1940 instead of 2024. So those were my numbers to get the house. But guess what? A fun fact of being a homeowner is that your house continues to cost you money. I have done a bunch of stuff to the house since we moved in. So for example, when we first moved in, the house didn't have any gutters and it had a leak in the roof. So I had to fix that immediately. And that was just under $2,000. My house is also heated by heating oil. So it's not an electric house. And that means I had to buy the actual oil to fill my oil tank. That was just under $600. Our microwave broke like 4 days after moving in, and my partner was able to fix it, but it did finally kick the bucket about 3 months after moving in, and I had to buy an entirely new microwave, which I got off Facebook Marketplace. I thrifted that, proud to say. I've had to buy tools for the house. I had to buy a mower because we have a lawn. I've bought shelving units because we don't have any closets, so we need storage. But houses are expensive. If you're thinking about buying a house, you have to understand it's so much more than just the down payment. And your monthly payment, the money that's gonna leave your account every single month, it's not just the mortgage. It's also property taxes and insurance. So your whole total payment, it's not just what the bank says is the mortgage. You also have to add in those other 2 costs. And I think a lot of people forget that. They feel like, I can afford the mortgage. And then it comes back to bite them in the butt when they have to pay property taxes and insurance. And I have so much more spending ahead of me. So for example, I have to buy rugs because this is New England and the floor gets cold in the winter. I've never had to do that before. There is something in the basement that needs to be fixed with the water. I don't know, it's on the inspection and I can't quite remember what it is, but that's probably gonna be like $800. I have to insulate my windows. Again, winter here is very real. I'm someone who talks a lot on this channel about saving money, but as a homeowner, I went into this knowing I'm gonna have to cough up a bunch of cash to get this house, and then probably the first 2 years of owning the house, I'm gonna have to cough up more cash. And I'm okay with that. That's a decision I made before I actually made the offer on the house, and I'm still okay with that decision. It's part of the home ownership game. And it's also a part of values-based spending, which is the budgeting system that I use. Values-based spending says, hey, spend your money on the things that are important to you. Having a safe, secure home is important to me. Having rugs on the floor so that my feet don't freeze when it's 30 degrees out is important to me. Values-based spending is not about spending as little as possible. That's not ever my goal in budgeting, and that's not ever my goal in life. It's about spending my money on the things that matter to me and align with my values. So I want to end this video with advice to my fellow first-time home buyers. Mistakes I made, things I wish I had done differently, things I wish I had known before I bought my house. First, spend less than you get approved for. The bank is going to tell you you can afford this $1 million house, but sit down, run the numbers, see what your mortgage is going to be, see what your property taxes are going to be, and see what your homeowner's insurance is going to be. Add all three things together and see how you feel about that number. My mortgage is about $1,900, but I pay more than that every single month because of those two other costs. Make sure that it's a number you can comfortably afford. I think my second piece of advice would also be understand that we're in a very unusual market. I paid $300,000 for a 690 square foot home. I think I will go to my grave believing that I overpaid, but also this was by far the cheapest house in the state of Massachusetts, probably. I was not going to find anything cheaper. And if I didn't buy this house, someone else would have. There was already one offer before mine was accepted. So understand if you're living in an expensive area or if you're living in an area that doesn't have a lot of inventory, you may have to make some sort of compromises, whether that's on price, whether that's on inspection. Like the market is tough right now, and I don't anticipate the market getting any easier in the short term. Eventually things will balance out. Interest rates will come down. We'll have more houses. People will have more money. Whatever it is, something will change. But if you're buying in the next year, understand you're going to be in a fairly tough market. And the third thing I would say is shop around your interest rate. I worked with one loan officer because they were really great. They were very hands-on. They were very available to me. Ultimately, I got stuck with a really high interest rate on this house, and it's because I didn't shop around because this loan officer was great. Like, honestly, they were great at their job. I really enjoyed working with them. I felt very safe with them, but they didn't offer me a great rate, and I didn't compare it to anything else. I think I felt pressured because I was in North Carolina, wasn't on the ground. I had already sent my realtor to see a bunch of houses. I felt kind of guilty, like these people are working really hard for me and I just have to make it easier for them. No, do not feel that way at all. These people do work for you, and guess what? You're gonna pay them. Like, they're gonna get paid. So make sure, especially when it comes to the interest rate matters so much. A 7% interest rate is so much more expensive than a 5% interest rate, and a 5.9% interest rate is so much more expensive than a 4.9 interest rate. So really shop around when it comes to your interest. Okay, y'all, that's it for this video. I've tried to be very thorough. Please let me know if you have any questions. Hit like if you are into this video, and subscribe if you want to know more about the challenges and costs of being a homeowner in 2024 and beyond. And please become a patron, where again, you will get access to that patrons only post about how I am managing my partner as a tenant. Yeah, thank you so much for watching, and make sure to come back for more videos.